Now move on to the panel discussion, the keynote panel discussion, which will be moderated by Mr. Ryan Ketchum, a partner from Hunton, Andrews and Kurth. And I would also like to invite our distinguished panelists. First, I would like to invite the Honorable Mr. Okasai Sridonius Opolot, Minister of State for Energy from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, Uganda. I would also like to invite Honorable Mr. Gwade Mantashe, Minister from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, South Africa. And I would also like to invite our third panelist, Mr. Enobot Agborau, Executive Secretary from the African Commission on Nuclear Energy. Ministers, gentlemen, please welcome onto the stage.
SMRs, about international cooperation. Let me ask each of you, what are the sort of key themes that stood out at you from what we have heard so far today?
Things that stood out for me is what the keynote speaker said about relationships. When you plan to embark on a nuclear power program, it's a long-term commitment. So it's very important that you very carefully choose the relationships that you get into to support that program. Because nuclear power is not cheap, so it will come with, huge financial commitments. It would divert resources from other areas, so you also have to think about your opportunity cost. But I think very importantly, as the keynote speaker said, we should choose our relationships very carefully. That's the main thing that stood out for me this morning so far.
To me, thank you very much, moderator. One, I noticed a few things. The first one was that we got the presentation from EDF, which is a French company. And we received a presentation from HNP, which is a Korean company. And we're having these presentations in Africa. And one of the most important highlights is that Africa has never ventured into nuclear in its life. South Africa has been the only country which had some nuclear capacity. And my starting point is that Africa has to take note very carefully what to do, because it should not allow the opportunity that is presenting itself now to pass again. Now, why is that opportunity very important? Actually, we've been having nuclear capacity in South Africa for 39 years now. This is year 39. That Quebec, which was actually designed and built by EDF, is in operation in South Africa. There are a few things I can say about Quebec, which is the only power station we're having, is that it may be a little bit stiff at commissioning. But once it is commissioned, it is very efficient, it is low cost, and it is reliable. And I think those are the issues that we should be looking at. And nuclear, we'll come back to that, is going to be quite critical in the debate now, particularly on the question of decarbonization. Nuclear is going to feature prominently in that debate. Let me leave it there for now.
Which Africa is rich in, for example, solar, hydro, wind in some areas. But we are looking into where do we want to take Africa. in the short and medium run. In the medium run, the need for energy is becoming increasingly urgent for Africa. And considering where we are at crossroads with the climate change, devastation of environment, nuclear is the next thing which is safe for the transition of Africa to clean energy. So it's becoming urgent for Africa to get involved in using nuclear as one source of unsustainable source of energy. And in the case of Uganda, we have actually done preparatory work to get our nuclear program running. And we are collaborating closely with the International Atomic Energy Agency to enable us to get into the safe use of nuclear, especially for peaceful purposes. And that's where we are as a country, but all this is aligned to SDGs, especially SDG 7, which is guiding the development of nuclear, development of energy globally. See, for now, that's where we are as a country.
Thank you very much, each of you, for your remarks. Minister Montash, if we can go back to you and South Africa for a moment. As you noted, South Africa is the only country on the continent with currently operating nuclear power plant. What lessons learned can you share with Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, other countries that are looking to develop a nuclear power program? And what advice would you have for them as the country on the continent which has an operating plant?
In South Africa, we're having an operating plant this year 39, and its lifespan is supposed to be 40 years. But we're working now on extending that life by another 20 years. So Quebec will be operational until 2044. That is the first thing. Most important about Quebec is that they give us electricity at 44 cents a unit, which is the lowest cost electricity we have as a country, and they provide us with 1,800 megawatts of energy. That is part of the big fleet of coal-generated power stations that we're having. Now, with the pressure to move away from coal and fossil fuels, nuclear, from where we stand, is an alternative that we should look into. Because though the pressure is to move to renewables, the intermittent nature of renewable energy requires a partner for a baseload technology. And nuclear is one such technology that is reliable as a partner. So for reliability of renewables, nuclear is going to be reliable. We have also looked into energy availability factor of the various technologies. Our experience, we have 6,100 megawatts of renewable energy thus far. We have a big build program that is underway, but its electricity energy availability factor for renewables is 25 to 30%. But energy availability factor for coal is over 70%. And energy availability factor for nuclear is over 80%. So, to me, that combination is quite important for us because nuclear is reliable, is safe. In the 40 years, that is 39 years that we're operating, we never had an accident in Quebec. So safety is guaranteed. Everybody who tells us about the dangers of nuclear will refer us to Chernobyl. And We have not seen another disaster other than Chernobyl, unless in this conference we'll learn more about it. So our view is that nuclear is quite reliable. We are planning to build another 2,500 megawatts of nuclear in South Africa. It's in our plan, and we've identified 2 sites where we're going to build it. And you'll remember that we also conducted the research on PBMR, which is quite a portable technology that can be used anywhere in the world. And therefore, the smart nuclear technologies were part of it in terms of research.
Balance, if you will, to the intermittency of solar and wind, and all of the success that South Africa has had in bringing in those renewable projects and the transition away from coal. You really see that as a key driver for building the nuclear fleet in South Africa, if I understood you.
It's quite important for us because our IRP, which is the Integrated Resource Plan, is not talking about moving away from coal to renewables. We don't talk about that. We are emphasizing the importance of moving from high carbon emission to low carbon emission. And once you do that, the context becomes a very balanced concept in the fact that you begin to realize the importance of mixed technology rather than just moving from one technology to the other. So moving from one extreme to the other is not going to work. Then we talk about mix of technologies. Among those technologies, nuclear is gas, a little bit of coal again. We're getting more than 75% of our energy from coal. So a debate that is hot in South Africa today is the just energy transition. And we are trying to put content to this concept of just energy transition. And we've come up to the point that says it can only be just if justice is done. And number 2, it can only be just if it talks to people. And people are not numbers. You don't just talk to numbers, you talk to people. And if it talks to communities. So that is what we see, and we think that nuclear is going to be a major player in that transitioning from high carbon emission to low carbon emission. And actually, we're quite excited when the EU identified nuclear and gas as part of the green transition. We thought that it gave us space to breathe, and we need to use that in terms of developing our transition from high carbon emission to low carbon emission.
Thank you. Minister Oppolat, if I could go back to you. Uganda has made some very interesting and key announcements over the past few days. What are the main challenges that you expect to encounter as Uganda navigates its strategy, and how do you look to minimize and overcome those challenges?
Yes, the challenges which we have pointed out in the course of our discussions are principally, 1, human resource development for nuclear. 2, infrastructure development. 3, financial. How do we get where we want? And to overcome these challenges, Uganda has put in place a framework to enable us overcome those challenges. 1, we have developed a nuclear energy roadmap, which tells us step by step how we can develop our nuclear program. We have also put in place the legislation, the laws that are required. In 2008, we actually put our first Atomic Energy Act of Uganda, and we had a policy which actually informed the development of the legislation. Two, we have, now that we have a roadmap, we are not actually waiting for everything to be in place. We have engaged in the studies to inform the various parts of our roadmap. Last year, we actually hosted International Atomic Agency to help us take our phased approach to establishing our first nuclear plant. And we are taking those phases seriously. Our phase 1 was approved by International Atomic Agency, and now we are in phase 2. The training of the human resource, the initial parts of it, we have actually, we have a starting point on the human resource. We have also carried out studies. For example, we have identified the potential sites for our nuclear plant. There are 3 areas which have been identified, and we have zeroed on one. And to develop human capacity that is required for the development of nuclear energy, we have identified one of our universities as a center of excellence, not only for training, but we also intend to use that center of excellence for diving into applied research on nuclear. We are looking at the training which is practical, and we are considering who are these that we can partner on the training. We have gone ahead to sign important MOUs with the partner states that have advanced in nuclear. We have signed 2 MOUs so far, and in the course of this meeting, we shall be signing another MOU. And I wouldn't want I would want to say that South Africa, who have been in nuclear for the last 40 years, we are considering developing an MOU for partnership. We are also considering our neighbors. You know, nuclear is so sensitive, you cannot do it in isolation of your neighbors who are within the East African community setting. Nuclear is one of the items which are being discussed, and we intend to do certain things strategically as a community of East Africa, and we do it together. I know Kenya is interested in getting into nuclear. Rwanda is in the course, so is Tanzania, even Sudan, and those are all our neighbors. So we cannot develop our nuclear program in isolation without considering what our neighbors are doing. In many discussions, there are certain aspects that we must consider. If we generated the power, we need also to be thinking of the market. We have an ambition of the study which is informing our strategy. By 2040, we should be generating about 2,000 megawatts out of nuclear. But to enable this to happen, we are looking across where do we have the market for this. What infrastructure is actually required to take that power once we have generated it. So we are strengthening the infrastructure for the supply of electricity, not only in country, we're also looking across to our neighboring countries. And we have a framework to absorb that electricity through the East African Power Pool. And the East African Power Pool is not only within the member states of East Africa. It goes beyond the member states of East Africa. It goes all the way to Northern Africa, Libya, and Egypt. And then within the infrastructure which we're establishing, there are linkages to other parts of Africa. When we have a power pool with Tanzania, Tanzania is connected to SADC power pool. And we're seeing how we can link the power pools beyond the East African community, beyond the East African power pool. So there's a ramification to enable power trade in Africa, and that's our big dream as a country, to overcome the challenges that we foresee.
Fantastic, thank you. For any of you, this next question is for any of you. You've really said it quite well, that cooperation with neighbors and cooperation in the region is key with a technology such as this one. And we've touched on the market for power, trading power across national boundaries. What other areas really require that type of regional cooperation in order to realize these aspirations? Maybe we could start at the end.
I previously spoke about relationships, and cooperation and relationships are siblings. They go together, they mean more or less the same thing. Talking about cooperation to develop nuclear power in Africa, I think we should look at it regionally. Regionally, I mean throughout Africa. I am representing the African Commission on Nuclear Energy. This is the Pan-African organization that was set up to coordinate nuclear cooperation among African countries. It was established to also coordinate cooperation on nuclear science and technology between African countries and external entities, such as foreign governments or other international organizations like the International Atomic Energy Agency. So what I want to stress here is, I am saying this because I know what I'm talking about. Before coming to AFCON, I was at the IAEA for 32 years. And prior to coming to AFCON, I was responsible for Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia for about 6 or 7 years. I know the challenges in the region. I know how the IAEA works. And I know that we gain very little if we go to the IAEA without first knowing what we want. We shouldn't go there and ask the IAEA to tell us what we need. When we engage with external partners, we come to the table knowing what our needs are, and we invite those partners to cooperate with us to achieve our aims. That's what we need to do. And AFCON provides the forum within which African countries can come together and exchange experience and knowledge and information in this effort to develop nuclear power in Africa. South Africa is probably the only country in Africa that has the Industrial framework, the industrial capacity, and a complete legislative framework to embark right now on advancing nuclear power. The rest of us are at different stages of doing this. And I think the best way to move forward is, rather than every country trying to do it by itself, we can pool our resources together. We can share our experiences in legislative areas as well as in industrial and technological capacity, so that everyone can move together at the same time and at the same speed. We have to brainstorm to decide what kind of nuclear technology we want to bring to Africa before we can choose, the options that were presented this morning by France, by Korea, and by others. We need to do that in Africa, and we have an organization that is established to do that. We can bring together all African experts to work on this. And my office is based in South Africa, close to the Pelindaba Nuclear Center. I have been to Pelindaba many times. I have been to all the major nuclear centers around the world on all continents, in Japan, in Europe, in North America, in China, in Korea. I've been everywhere. And I can tell you that the Pelindaba Center is a world-class center. It's up there with any center anywhere in the world. But we tend to quickly run overseas for assistance when most of it is in Pelindaba. So I think we have to start looking inwards. We have to start leveraging to the maximum possible our regional capacities. And that would give us the basis to be able to cooperate in a way that brings benefit to us when we engage with external entities. Thank you.
Thank you. So I understand that we have a very distinguished guest who is going to join us, His Excellency the President, at 11 o'clock. I know that we need to make our way over, so we probably have another 3 or 4 minutes. Would anyone like to say something in conclusion, if you will?
Yeah, you see, nuclear is not just energy supply. It requires research capacity. And we've been into nuclear research for 58 years in South Africa. Safari 1 is coming to the end of its life. We're busy developing a multi-reactor research facility. And it is important because it extends the usefulness of nuclear beyond just energy. It also helps us develop isotopes, which are quite important for treatment of cancer. And we're one of the leading countries in the trade of isotopes. So it's quite important to have a multi-pronged approach in dealing with nuclear. Number two, my colleague here from Uganda talks of interconnection. SADC is interconnected. That's why when we're under pressure, as we are now, we can import energy from Mozambique and the neighboring countries. And that is quite important. But the most important thing about the interconnectedness is that you become a community rather than an individual country. And fortunately, energy, when it gets into the grid, it loses identity. It's no energy from nuclear or from hydro or from coal. It's just energy when it is interconnected. So it's quite important for us to engage in nuclear research, and universities that are involved in training nuclear scientists must be identified, and we must cooperate with them and not treat them as outsiders. They are part of the network that you need.
Thank you.
Yes, to chip into what my colleague from South Africa is saying, I note the urgency for us to not look at nuclear as only for power generation. Uganda as a country, we are looking at how do we expand the uses of nuclear. And this goes to the whole of Africa. Africa is rich in resources, rich in minerals. To benefit from those minerals, we must do a lot of research to see what is it that we have and how can we use it. So expanding the uses and research in the nuclear is extremely important, and we're looking at getting into, again, getting the nuclear research reactors, which will inform and enable us to study the various resources, including interventions in climate change and environment. So those diverse uses of nuclear should be looked into as a continent. I'm glad my colleague, on the other hand, is talking about the frameworks that are available as an African framework for cooperation in nuclear. And we actually would wish to see that framework strengthened and benefit all the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much to each of you for sharing your perspectives. Perhaps the audience will assist me in thanking you for that.